What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 4 top 30 running back rankings, splitting these guys up into different tiers. If you guys enjoyed the video, smash that like button, subscribe. I'll also have the wide receivers out today, but let's just dive right into Tier 1 here. I have 4 Tier 1 running backs. All these guys have been very solid to start off the season. We have Saquon Barkley taking on the Bucks. We have Breece Hall taking on the Broncos, Bijan Robinson taking on the Saints, and then Alvin Kamara taking on the Falcons. If we were to redraft, for fantasy football here after 3 weeks, you could make a very strong case that Saquon would be the running back one. He's been a monster. Even though the Buccaneers in previous years have been very tough against the run, that has not been the case through 3 weeks here. I also think he has some increased receiving upside with injuries to both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. Then for Breece Hall here, I've seen some people have some minor concerns with Braylon Allen kind of cutting into his workload. For me, I'm not super freaked out because do you really want Breece Hall handling the ball 30 plus times a game? Maybe in the short term, week to week, it would be awesome. But 30 plus opportunities a game for a guy like Breece Hall, I feel like you're just going to run him into the ground. He's going to have, a lot of receiving upside with Aaron Rodgers. He's still getting the valuable touches, the goal line looks, a lot of the 2-minute drill snaps. So I actually am completely fine with Breece Hall's usage. He was someone I drafted a decent amount, and I'm not really concerned about it. Then we have Bijan Robinson, another guy where I feel like some people have some concerns here with Bijan. Another guy where I feel like the usage has been solid. He hasn't had these huge explosive games yet, but if he maintains this usage going forward, I do think those big games are going to come. And then the final guy here, Alvin Kamara, just playing at a super high level through 3 weeks. The usage is very strong. I feel like he has to be a tier 1 guy. Now looking at tier 2, I feel like the running back position just seems very strong at this point. Quarterback, tight end, wide receiver are all kind of struggling. The running back position is holding strong. I start off this tier with Jordan Mason going up against the Patriots. I think a lot of people, including myself, thought he'd have a better game script going up against the Rams. Was not expecting the Rams to take that game with all the injuries they had on the offensive side. Jordan Mason didn't really get the game script I guess I was banking on. I think he's pretty much guaranteed that game script here against the Patriots. Maybe not guarantee, but I think it's very likely the 49ers are going to go ahead. He's going to handle a very large workload on the ground and likely be fairly efficient with some touchdown upside. Then we have Kyren Williams, who I didn't really know how to rank him last week because you have the injuries to the offense, the wide receivers, the offensive line, and it could have gone one of two ways. The first one is that Kyren Williams really struggles. His efficiency's not there. He doesn't have the touchdown upside. The other way it could have gone, which is the way it went, is that he just dominates the usage like he's been doing through the first 2 weeks, and he's just taking every opportunity. The Rams offense is decent, and he's just absolutely smashing. That's what we saw in week 2. I feel like you got to fire up Kyren Williams, or week 3. I feel like you got to fire him up as a very strong running back 1. Then we have Devon Achane, and some people might be panicking because he kind of had his first down week, in the 1 week without Tua, but he still had a solid workload, 11 carries, 5 targets. I feel like it's tough for the Dolphins to be worse than they were in week 3, so I'm not panicking here with Achane. I still think he has that big play upside, and I think he'll be fine. The receiving usage is really what's kind of saving him here, 5 targets in the first 3 games. That's a great sign moving forward. Then I have Jahmyr Gibbs, who's just been solid through the first 3 weeks here. Nothing crazy, no high ceiling games, but I think you fire him up as a nice mid to back end RB1. After Gibbs, we have Derrick Henry coming off a monster week 3. I think the game script could be a little bit suspect here. We know he's someone who's going to be better when the Ravens get a lead, like we saw them do against the Cowboys, and they're not going to be super aggressive. Lamar didn't have a ton of pass attempts in week 3. They're just going to pound the ball on the ground. The problem here against the Bills is that the Bills go up early. This could be a Justice Hill game where he is leading in snaps, like we saw in the first couple of weeks. So Derrick Henry, still an RB1 play, but I don't know if this is the smash spot where he's getting 20 plus carries a game, getting into the end zone a couple of times. This could be one of those frustrating 15 carry games where he's on the bench a lot. So just throwing it out there, but obviously you're still starting him, in your normal size leagues. Then we have Jonathan Taylor, who's been really good through 3 weeks. He's honestly just ranked kind of low here because this is a really tough matchup against a very good Steelers defense. And I know JT has been great individually, but in terms of having the touchdown upside, getting those opportunities to score, you're going to need a little bit of help from your quarterback. And I just have not seen enough out of Anthony Richardson to trust him to move the ball really at all against the Steelers defense. So I think obviously you're still playing him as an RB1, but maybe temper expectations a little bit here in week 4. Now shifting into tier 3, still running backs that I feel very solid about here. Starting off with James Conner going up against the Commanders. Like the matchup here, we just saw Zach Moss, Chase Brown have pretty effective games against this Commanders defense. James Conner's dominated the opportunities, had his first down game in week 3, but not super concerned. It was a bad matchup. I'm sure he'll bounce back here. Then we have James Cook going up against the Ravens, and this is kind of a tough spot for Cook. The Ravens have allowed the 5th fewest points per game to the running back position, but I still think he's a nice option here, showcasing some more touchdown upside than we saw last year, getting him some opportunities near the goal line, which is huge for his fantasy upside. So I think rest of season, he's definitely a locked-in running back 1. This week, just more like on the back end of that. And then after James Cook, we have Zach Charbonnet, and this is obviously going to be assuming that Kenneth Walker doesn't play. It's certainly possible that Kenneth Walker returns here in week 4, but I think just for these rankings, we don't have a great idea on Kenneth Walker's timetable or what sort of split there would be. If he does play, is it going to be limited? All of that stuff. So I feel like it's easier to just rank Charbonnet, and then we'll adjust later in the week if Kenneth Walker is playing. But he has had really solid usage in 2 games without Kenneth Walker, 14 and 18 carries, 4 and 5 targets. The problem is this is just a really tough matchup. The Lions have allowed by far the fewest points per game to the running back position. They've just been locked down against opposing teams' run games. So that's the concern. But if you're going to give this guy 16 carries, 4 or 5 targets a game, I think he's going to, come away with at least something, even in a tough matchup. Then after Zach Charbonnet, we're going with Aaron Jones going up against the Packers. And Jones has been a very pleasant surprise this year. I think a lot of people thought he kind of had a capped ceiling. There was obviously some uncertainty with this Vikings offense, but he has looked very good through 3 weeks. This Vikings offense has looked very good through 3 weeks. So got to feel good about Aaron Jones here as a high-end RB2. And then the final guy in this tier, this is someone who I talked about as a buy low heading into last week, or I guess the Monday night game. It's Zach Moss, because his usage was so strong in week 2. He didn't have the production, but we finally saw the usage kind of lead to the production in week 3. He had a 76% snap share, a 71% route participation, had 12 carries, 6 targets, in a game that wasn't super game script friendly for the running back position, at least from a rushing perspective. Here against the Panthers, this seems like a smash spot for Zach Moss. I think he's going to dominate the carries if they can go ahead early. He's obviously going to handle a large workload. So I like Zach Moss here to wrap up tier 3. Now looking at tier 4, starting it off with Brian Robinson Jr., and you could definitely make an argument that B-Rob should be up in tier 3. This is going to be assuming that Austin Eckler is going to miss with a concussion. And I think B-Rob's been pretty solid through 3 weeks, showcased at least some touchdown upside, even though you have Jane Daniels kind of taking some of those opportunities with his legs. But I feel like if B-Rob can become the 3-down back, he'll have that goal line upside, he'll have the early down roll, but now if he can work in on those passing downs, I think, he definitely becomes a much better fantasy option. After B-Rob, going with Josh Jacobs here, going up against the Vikings. This has kind of been a tough start for Josh Jacobs because he's been very effective on the ground. He's been efficient. He's had solid workloads. It just hasn't led to fantasy points. This is going to be assuming that Jordan Love is out. If Jordan Love plays, I definitely would feel a little bit better on Josh Jacobs just in terms of the touchdown upside. There's going to be, more goal line opportunities for him. But this is also a tough matchup here against the Vikings. They've allowed the 6th fewest points per game to the running back position. So mid-tier RB2 for Josh Jacobs here with no Jordan Love. I feel like that's kind of a fair spot. Then I have Travis Etienne here as the running back 18. And maybe this is an overreaction to week 3, but I just feel like the running back position is so strong. A lot of these guys are on, effective offenses. Zach Moss coming off a great game. Aaron Jones, Charbonnet, even Brian Robinson, guys like this. And you look at the Jaguars, the offense has not been in sync. Travis Etienne hasn't been great for fantasy. You've got some guys, Tank Bigsby, Dearness Johnson, kind of eating into his workload a little bit, which isn't awful, but if they're eating into goal line opportunities, certain receiving spots, which, who knows what could happen in the future, that's going to be tough for a guy on an offense that's struggling here. So mid-tier RB2, and hopefully we get some sort of bounce back here from the Jaguars offense. Then I have David Montgomery, and this does feel a little bit low for Demont because he's actually outproduced Jahmyr Gibbs through 3 weeks. I just think Gibbs has a little bit of a higher floor because he has a receiving upside. I don't think he's quite as touchdown dependent, but if you want to make the argument that, you can just pencil in David Montgomery for a touchdown and he should be ranked higher, I'm not going to push back a ton. He's been a super reliable option, but in your normal size leagues, even though I have him here as the running back 19, he's still likely going to be locked into your lineups. Now, shifting into tier 5, honestly, a tier where I still have a decent amount of confidence in these guys. We started off here with Tony Pollard, had a strong, workload in week 3. He's really kind of pulled away from Tajay Spears in terms of the snaps, the routes, the usage. It's just a tough offense to trust and fully buy into. I know some people thought I had him ranked too low heading into last week. He had a solid week 1, a solid week 2. There's just not much of a floor here with this Titans team, especially if they're trailing. Like, Tajay Spears is still going to be involved as a pass catcher. He's not a complete zero within this backfield. So I feel like that mid-tier RB2 area is probably a fair spot to have Tony Pollard moving forward. After Pollard, I have Carson Steele, and I'm pretty high on him this week. He had really strong usage in week 3. Even if it didn't lead to a great fantasy game, he took 17 of the 23 running back carries. He took 2 of the 3 goal line snaps. I know they elevated Kareem Hunt. He could have some sort of a role here. But I feel like, he's been out there. He's been available. They could have gone out and gotten Kareem Hunt instead of Samaje Perine. They didn't. So I feel like Kareem Hunt is really just a depth option at this point. I feel like Carson Steele is going to be their guy. And this is just a great spot in terms of the game script where the Chiefs are 8.5-point favorites at this point. This is a spot where Carson Steele could rack up a monster workload. He's going to have touchdown upside, even if he didn't get into the end zone in week 3. So I really like Carson Steele this week. I also really like Najee Harris going up against the Colts. You have Jaylen Warren, who's likely out. Najee had like an injury scare, but seems like he's good to go here for week 4. And this Colts defense is interesting because they were just shredded on the ground in week 1 and week 2, gave up back-to-back 150-yard rushers. Believe it was Joe Mixon, and then it was Josh Jacobs in week 2. Maybe those weeks are flipped around, but they got gashed on the ground. Then they played the Bears, and it was kind of like this battle of the Bears' terrible run game versus the Colts' terrible run defense. And the run defense won here for the Colts, but I'm not super, locked in that that's something that's going to carry over moving forward. I think Najee could have an efficient day. He's had very strong usage even without Jaylen Warren, so definitely someone who is interesting here as a running back too. Then I have J.K. Dobbins, really kind of pulled away with the usage from Gus Edwards, 15 out of 18 carries, all 3 targets. This is probably just not a great game script here against the Chiefs. You also have Justin Herbert, who's banged up. And if Herbert's not playing, this could be a really, really rough-looking Chargers offense. And then the final guy in this tier, or actually 2 more, we have Cam Akers going up against the Jaguars. And this is a spot where we still have to wait on Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce. One or both of those dudes could end up playing, but if they're out again, this is where I'd slot in on Cam Akers. And then the final guy in this tier, Ramondre Stevenson. And if you played Ramondre in week 3, it was definitely tough. I don't think that means he's like unplayable moving forward, but you kind of just have to understand what you're getting yourself into. He's going to have a very low floor on this Patriots offense because they could just lay complete clunkers offensively. But, like we saw week 1, week 2, he can still have productive games, but I think he's much more of like that back-end RB2, kind of where you drafted him, than maybe like the RB1 numbers he was putting up early on in the season. So Ramondre, still think he's a fine play, but obviously people probably aren't as stoked on him as they were after 2 weeks. Then looking at tier 6, just a few guys here. Devin Singletary going up against the Cowboys. This is an interesting matchup here because Singletary has been pretty good through 3 weeks. He's coming off his best game of the season, and the Cowboys have gotten gashed on the ground in back-to-back weeks. I can't really tell if this is just a smash matchup here against the Cowboys, or is it they just went up against 2 good offenses, the Saints who were rolling, Alvin Kamara, gashed them on the ground, and then you had Lamar and Derrick Henry, which is obviously a different animal than Daniel Jones and Devin Singletary. So we'll see. If Singletary goes out and just has a fantastic day on the ground, then you probably just have to target this Cowboys matchup. But right now, have him as a high-end RB3. Then I have Chuba Hubbard going up against the Bengals. This might seem low because he just had dominant usage, a huge game in week 3, 21 out of 28 carries, 5 out of 7 targets. I do think, though, that this could be a tougher matchup. I know the Bengals defense just got completely shredded by the Commanders, but their run defense was actually really good in that game. And the Bengals are going to be favored in this one. In a game script where they're trailing, I do think they could pivot a little bit more towards Miles Sanders. We saw Sanders lead the team in routes run, even in that big Chuba game. So maybe I'm being a little bit harsh here on Chuba, but one big game and like a peak offensive performance, I don't want to overreact too much to that. I definitely still think he's playable here, but I have him more as like a high-end RB3 as opposed to just like launching him into RB2 territory. And then the other guy in this tier, Jerome Ford, his usage has kind of been all over the place. It was strong week 1, took a big hit in week 2, bounced back in week 3. He's not going to be overly efficient. He's not going to have a ton of touchdown upside, but sure, he's playable here in a matchup against the Raiders. And then outside of the top 28 here, these last two in tier 7, this is pretty much like close to unplayable territory. Like, I get it, injuries, stuff like that. You may be stuck with these guys. So they're not the worst of the worst, but top 28 was pretty much the cutoff of the guys I feel comfortable throwing into my lineup. So 29, I have Bucky Irving here. I feel like this is the week where we could see a flip in usage between him and Rachaad White. Todd Bowles has talked about how he's kind of earned more opportunities. He also talked about how Rachaad White's getting more snaps because he's better in pass protection, which is obviously going to be the limiting factor here for Bucky Irving. But I do think we could see a flip in terms of the opportunities, or at least like very close to a 50-50. And Bucky Irving has just been the better guy. So if they're 50-50, I'm going to prefer Bucky. And then the other guy here, Rico Dowdle, kind of leading this gross Cowboys backfield. You could have worse options than, the potential leader here for the Cowboys. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 30. Let me know your thoughts. Any questions, drop them down below. I'll be going through my top 40 after the Thursday night game, so stay tuned for that. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.